good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you're watching this in our new Zoom reality. Hello. My name is Janae Johnson, and I am the Executive Director of I Thrive Empowerment. Year 2020 has been like no other, but one thing that is the same, we have continued to empower, educate, and transform our girls. This summer, we started a new journey called Social Justice Summers. And this video is a short introduction into what we've done for the last 10 weeks. We took important social justice issues and allowed our girls to explore, research, and form their own opinions about those particular social justice issues. Upon completion of their research and study, they got the opportunity to create and craft their own questions for a professional interview regarding that specific social justice issue. How exciting and forward. Please take some time, listen to our girls, see what you think, and watch how amazing they are. If you want to find out more about I Thrive Empowerment, please visit us at our website at www.ithrivempowerment.org. This year, we have some amazing things to close out the last 3 months. You want to be a part of it. So make sure you leave some feedback. Let us know how amazing our girls did. I can't wait for the future. Have a great day. All right, guys, I'm turning it over to y'all.
Good evening. My name is Tanaya, and this is my partner.
My name is Davin. Thank you so much for joining us. We are part of Social Justice Summers, and we are excited for this meeting.
So before we get started, we would like to know something, know a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so thank you for having me. I'm Raven Douglas. I am the political director at Move Texas. We're an organization that works across the state to do youth voter engagement and engage young people in our democracy. I'm originally from Houston, born and raised, went to college at the University of Texas at San Antonio, and now am doing voter engagement work here in Texas. So happy to be with y'all today.
That's exciting. Tell me about what the political director at Move Texas does.
That's a great question. So essentially in my role, I'm responsible for a number of different things. So one, I oversee our advocacy department. And so in our advocacy department is where we do all of our like political advocacy work. And so a lot of our work is centered around voting rights. And so some of that work looks like making sure that we have polling locations on college campuses, ensuring, for example, in this election that voters who are over the age of 65 get a vote by mail application, and really just doing things to try to make voting as easy and accessible as possible. And so I lead a team of about 5 people across the state. We do work in Laredo, San Antonio, Austin, Dallas, and Houston. And so a big part of my work is just ensuring that they have all the tools that they need to do their work locally and on the ground. And then another kind of big portion of my work is fundraising. So I work for a nonprofit organization. We have to raise the money to not only pay our employees, but to keep the lights on and to do all the critical work that we do. So I work with our development team to ensure that we have, written plans to be able to meet with funders and donors to ensure that we can continue to do this work. And then a big kind of third section of my work is kind of being a like social ambassador and public ambassador for the work that we do. So it's doing things like this, sitting on panels, talking to reporters, and things like that to really kind of effectively get our name, the word out there, because, it's one thing we always say, like, it's great that we do great work, but especially as a nonprofit, it's no good if people don't know about the work that we do. And so that's how I spend a lot of my time at Move.
That's very interesting. Well, with voting, a lot of people don't know it's 2 different types of voting. There's popular voting and there's electoral vote. What is the difference?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So essentially, what happens is on November 3rd or during early voting, the entire country will vote for your president. And so everyone will go in and cast their vote. And so there will be a total number of votes that are casted across the country. And so that is kind of the total number of popular votes. However, the Electoral College is a system that was set up a long time ago, essentially with the pretext that regular voters or layman people don't necessarily have the knowledge to cast the final vote. And so the Electoral College was built up in a way where certain states get a certain number of votes. Depending on how that district votes, that number of, that will tell you how the Electoral College will generally vote. And so the way that it's been proportioned, and we saw in the 2016 election, is that although we saw a higher popular vote for one particular candidate, the Electoral College ended up going to a different person. And so that's who we have as the president today. And so generally the Electoral College votes in the way that their district votes or their area votes. There are opportunities where they can not do that. However, there are penalties and fines, and sometimes you can even be jailed for that. But that's essentially the difference between the popular vote and kind of how that intersects with the Electoral College.
That's interesting. Do you think it's more important to vote in the local, state, or national election?
In my opinion, I think all elections are important, but I think that it is super critical that we're not only voting for president, but we're also voting for our local races and state races as well. And so when we look at our local races, for example, in Texas, our elections are ran at the county level. There are 254 counties, and depending on the state, the county that you live in, either your elections are ran by the county clerk, or they are ran by a nonpartisan elections administrator. But that elections administrator does report to the county commissioner, which they are elected positions. So both the county clerk and the county commissioner, as well as the county judge, who sits on commissioner's court, they oversee elections. So when we talk about early voting hours, when we talk about the number of polling locations, where they are, if they're in communities of color or low income communities, that kind of is all determined at the hyper local level. And some of these races are won by less than 100 votes. And so when we look at things like elections, that's local. In Texas, when we look at criminal justice, your sheriff, you elect your sheriff in Texas. Your city council members, they're the ones who decide the police budget for, the Houston Police Department. That's an elected position. So when we talk a lot of times about like how we can change things that impact our everyday life, they are those local people that are in power. And those are oftentimes the elections that are looked over, but the most important.
That's interesting. I've never thought about it that way. But I feel like what's the importance of national and state elections?
Yeah, I think they're all important because they all do different things, right? So at the state level, then we can talk about, funding for public education and the fact that the state of Texas has defunded public education consistently over the past 10 years, right? And so that's where we talk about what's happening at our, in the state legislature with your state representative or your senator. Those things are happening at the state level. Also, as we look towards the federal level, once you all get into college and look at, student loan debt, I'm someone that has student loan debt, and so as we look towards student loan debt relief, that's something that can absolutely happen at the federal level. So that's why federal elections are important. But also the state can pass a number of different student loan forgiveness programs at the state level. And so they all of these pieces and people kind of contribute all into one big system. And so we need to ensure that all of our elected officials, whether it's at the state level, the local level, or at the federal level, are representative of the people and passing policies that benefit us, because it impacts us all.
2020 was a very important year in women's history. It marked the 100th anniversary of women gaining the right to vote. How do you feel that women obtaining the right to vote changed America?
Yeah, I think, it is the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, but I think it's important to note that the 19th Amendment gave white women the right to vote. It did not give Black women the right to vote. It did not give brown women the right to vote. We didn't see that until later down the line and later in history. But I think that, speaking of all women and why it's important, for us to vote and what does the 19th Amendment mean, and just thinking about, the suffrage movement and all of that, I think that it's super critical. We continue to see women, and particularly women of color, lead this movement. And lead when it comes to voting and elected officials, and we've seen the power that they hold and what they do. For example, in Harris County in Houston, the county judge is a woman of color, and she's the youngest county judge. I believe she's like 30 or 31. And she is a Latina, and, you know, she is overseeing one of the largest counties in the country. And so we continue to see, you know, women step up, and, you know, even prior to us having the right to vote. And so I think after we have the right to vote, we've really been able to kind of cultivate the leadership that we want to see.
That's very important because I wanted to know, do you think this is a monumental election, and if so, why?
I absolutely think it's a monumental election, and I think so for a number of different reasons. I think one, you know, especially in Texas and especially kind of in this youth voting rights movement, is that we've been building towards this election. And so MOVE was started in 2013, and we've slowly, you know, up until this time, we've registered over 100,000 young people to vote. And so we're not the only organization here in Texas doing this work, and there are over 1 million people who are now eligible to vote compared to the 2016 election. And so I think that we are going to see very high turnout in youth communities and communities of color this election. And I also think that there is a lot on the line. There are opportunities for us to, you know, enact transformative change, not only at the national level, but at the local level as well. And so I just think that the 2020 election is going to be super critical, and I'm excited to see young people turn out to vote and make their voices heard.
I agree. How do you feel about Kamala Harris running for vice president?
You know, I work for a nonpartisan organization, so I can't speak too much on what's happening with the Democratic Party, but I will say, you know, speaking personally, I think it is so critical and so important for me as a Black woman, as a Black young woman, to see another Black woman in that seat. I think also it's really important that, you know, she doesn't have necessarily, you know, the best policies or whatever that may be, or I may not agree with that, but I think that it's super crucial that this is a time where we should be like protecting Black women, and ensuring that, you know, we're not just tearing her down because of the way that she looks, or just because she's a woman, or discrediting what she has to say. And so I think, you know, very similar to the election of President Obama, like how important that was for the Black community, I think that this is just as important, especially with Black women.
I feel the exact same way. So I know when you're out and some people, they feel like their vote doesn't count. How do you combat with that?
Yeah, you know, I think half of my work is kind of like combating that same thing. You know, when we talk to young people, there was a study that was done on why young people in Texas don't vote. And the main reason was, one, voting is too hard, and then two, my vote doesn't matter. And so as we kind of address that first question, you know, voting is hard in Texas. Texas is one of the hardest states to vote in. But, you know, working with organizations like us, it may take a couple extra steps, but it's not impossible, and we can make it happen. But when it comes to my vote doesn't matter, you know, I'm of the belief that that is just simply not true. One, especially at the local level, when we're in, you know, our work, a lot of times we go to college campuses, we speak to students, and so we'll be in an auditorium of, you know, 400 students, and we'll, you know, show them that, like, if every person in this room voted, you could have flipped the city council election, right? And so the power, when we come together and we build collective power, we can really do anything that we want. But I also think too, you know, if our vote wasn't so important, they wouldn't be doing as much as they could to disenfranchise us. So, you know, in Texas, you can't, in other states, if you have a student ID at your college, university, or if you're 18 and you go to a high school, you can use your student ID to vote. But in Texas, you can't do that. Of course, you can use your concealed handgun license to vote, but you can't use your student ID. There are strategic efforts happening at the county level to take away polling locations at college campuses. In the 2019 legislative session, there was a bill that passed that basically outlawed all temporary polling locations, and it basically shuttered a great deal of polling locations on college campuses in places like Fort Worth, and in places like Austin, where they would let students vote for 2 or 3 days and then go to another campus. But because of this law, now there are dozens of campuses across the state where they don't have polling locations. And so it's super crucial that we vote to protect our vote, because there are definitely people in power who don't want us to cast our ballot.
I never thought of it that way. but what can we do as young women to execute your plans?
Yeah, so I think that everyone has a role kind of in this fight, right? So whether you are, getting registered to vote or voting yourself, in Texas, if you're 16, you can be a student poll worker. So you can sign up and work the polls and get paid, and you can get an excused absence from your principal. That's another opportunity. But I also think it's super important just to like talk about these issues. Prior to me stepping into this work and going to UTSA, that's how I heard of MOVE. Like we didn't talk about voting in my family. We talked about community service we talked about civic engagement from a perspective of community service. So my mom ran our like church's food pantry, and that's kind of our way of like giving back and civic engagement and giving back to communities. But it wasn't until I learned about voting rights and how it's not accessible to Texas, and how they intentionally disenfranchise Black voters, especially in Texas. I was able to begin having those conversations with my family and my extended family and my friends. And now, no one in my family or people around me, they don't go on election without voting, right? Because they know that like it's important, because I've explained that to them, but they also do it as a way to not like make me mad, right? So I think that, if you can get, your parents to go to the polls, and they can get another 2 people, and then those people can get another 2 people, we can, again, as I said, really build collective power and, increase the turnout that we see here in Texas. Was that all of the questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay, cool. So we're all done. Caroline, you can come back now.
Well, thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. We will try as hard as we can to get people out to vote and to help you all out. But that's it on my end. Devin, do you have anything to say?
Yes, thank you for your time. We really appreciated this, and these questions were very meaningful to us. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.